Hello and welcome to the podcast Emotional Intelligence, your greatest asset and key to success. I'm your host, Dr. Jami Carlacio, coming to you from the Greater New Haven, Connecticut area. As a positive intelligence or PQ coach, I'm committed to helping people develop both emotional intelligence and mental fitness. That is, you'll come to regard problems as situations that help you learn and grow. PQ is a way of being and doing in the world that enables you to develop and sustain a positive relationship with yourself and others, at home, at work, and everywhere in between. Please subscribe to this podcast and tap the like button so more people can enjoy the benefits of PQ. And now, here's the show. And before we begin, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Arthur Murray Dance Studio of Guilford, Connecticut. It's along Connecticut's shoreline. Their new supporter, and I have to say, I was feeling kind of blah and I needed to spice up my social life. So I said, heck, I'm taking dance lessons, and I signed up, and it has been a game changer for me. Not only do I take private lessons with a very patient and upbeat and wonderful instructor, but I go to dance parties and I have dance lessons every week, and I have met a ton of really nice people who are single, people who are coupled. So everyone comes of all ages. It's been just amazing. And of course, there's been some stepping on feet, of course, but nothing big, and they're very patient. So whether you are single or coupled and you just want to get out and move around, you can come and learn from the best in the business. Tango, swing, waltz, foxtrot, it's all there. So check out their website at arthurmurrayguilford.com or call 203-458-9000 and tell them Jami sent you. I'm Jami, and I am here with a very, very dear friend, Dr. Margaret Barrow. And today we are going to talk about impact versus intent. So first thing I want to do is introduce Margaret to you. Margaret and I have known each other since 2013. We used to teach together in Manhattan at Borough of Manhattan Community College, where she mentored me. She was the associate chair of the department, and I used to go to her office with all of my sob stories. And then Margaret would share her experience and pep me up and pat me on the back and send me on my way. And so we have been friends ever since. I no longer teach there. As you might guess, I'm a podcaster now and I live in Connecticut. But anyway, Margaret is awesome. So Margaret is, hold on there, sister. I'm going to say a few words about you.
Okay.
She is Margaret. So Margaret's been a professor for, I don't know, for a long time, more than 20 years, Margaret.
Yeah.
How many?
Almost 30.
Almost 30 years. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And she is the author of a book called Care and Teaching, A Complicated Relationship. And she is also the author of an essay called Sweetest Candy, Education for the Love of Teachers, and the Love of Teachers, in a book called Gumbo for the Soul, Liberating Memoirs and Stories to Inspire Females of Color. And she co-authored an article called Students' Attitudes on Social Network Sites and Their Actual Use for Career Management Competences and Professional Identity Development. And that is incredibly mouthful.
Yeah.
And most of her writing and research is founded on the ethics of care and teaching. And let me tell you, she lives those values. She is probably one of the most popular teachers at the college and clearly the most amazing one. And in 2017, she created granola bites, and I have had them and they are awesome, and for health reasons. And she focused on creating a granola that was not full of junk. And as you know, if you read the back of a package, it usually has stuff that you can't pronounce, and it's probably got high fructose corn syrup in it or something terrible. But these are completely natural ingredients. So she brought these to the college to share with her students, and of course they raved about them. And then in 2018, when she was encouraged by them to sell them, she started a company called It's Nola, and she is one of our supporters of the show, and her information will be in the show notes. And I guarantee you, you will love these things. They are like little granola bites. They're round and they come in lots of different flavors, but it's a plant-based snack. And Margaret lives in Brooklyn, so that's where the company is based. And now what I really like about this is really important. Margaret uses her profits, she gives back to the community. So she supports mentoring relationships and inspiring community college students to follow their dreams. So It's Nola was born out of that need to eat healthy and a desire to make a difference. And welcome, 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 Margaret, my
Thank
dear
you.
friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Yeah, so the topic has been on my mind for years, actually. When I started doing a lot of anti racism trainings and I did some DEI work, I came up against this. And I have to say that as a white person, in interacting with people in minoritized groups or people who identify, and it doesn't just have to be people of color, it can be anyone of, a person in the LGBTQ community or, any other, the disability community or whatever. And I didn't understand that your good intentions don't
Mhm.
always matter if the way that the thing you said or did landed on somebody in a way that was harmful or hurtful.
Mhm.
And this totally relates to emotional intelligence and positive intelligence. So, just for those of you who are wondering, well, what do you mean by intent and impact? It's a distinction that really helps us maintain inclusive environments. And intent is what you meant to say or what you intended it to mean. And impact is how it landed or how it affected the other person. So, regardless of the intent, we have to recognize our behaviors, our language, our actions, and how they affect other people. And it's not just recognizing it, though, it's really taking ownership of it and being accountable. So, in terms of emotional intelligence, this is about self awareness and understanding how to navigate the world and navigate complex relationships, because we do live in a world where we are all connected and we are very different, whether it's culturally, ethnically, nationally, religiously, politically, it doesn't matter. And so we want to we want to just try to think of ways to resolve conflict. And for me, what's really important is trying to see what's good in other people too.
Mhm.
Because if we other people all the time, we're never going to be self aware. We're never going to get to that place of, we all bleed red blood, right? And we all have hurt feelings. And one thing that I'll just say this and then I'll ask you to comment, Margaret.
Mhm.
It's often the case, and this has happened to me, that when somebody takes offense, maybe, or reacts in a way that shows that that was a hurtful thing,
Mhm.
that we say, well, I didn't mean it that way, or you're just being really sensitive, or, I don't even know, I don't know how come you didn't get that. So we end up getting really defensive, and then it makes us right and it makes the other person wrong.
Mhm.
And that has happened to me many times. And I've been paying attention to that. And I had a workplace situation where a person and I didn't get along. I actually mentioned this in the first couple of podcasts last year, and we had
Mhm.
a really contentious workplace relationship for 9 months. And it took me 8 months to realize that even though I hadn't quote unquote done something, the fact that I was who I am and he was who he is, neither of us, were
Mhm.
terrible people, but how I affected him, it didn't dawn on me that I affected him in the way I did. And
Mhm.
so basically, what it meant was I didn't see him. I didn't see him, and experienced me through a particular filter, his
Mhm.
own upbringing, his own, socioeconomic status, his own color. He's a person of color. He's an older man, kind of a little bit more traditional, and I'm very non traditional, and obviously I'm white.
Mhm.
So it was a really good learning experience for me.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
good news is I was able to really repair that relationship, and
Oh,
that
good.
that made I know that made a huge difference. So
Mhm.
so that's just for kickoff starters. Do you want to add your
Yeah.
2 cents or 4 cents?
Well, sometimes those relationships can't be repaired, and I had a situation at work where one of our colleagues said to me, first he walked over to me and he said, "Oh, could you proofread this for me?" And I said, "Sure, no problem." And then we started talking, and then he made a flippant comment like, "Oh, you have an EDD." And
Oh.
I said to him, "What is that supposed to mean?" And he's like, "No, no, no." And I said to him, "No, you said something. I think you meant what you said." And he said, "No, no, no, that's not what I meant." And I said, in this case, I think that the intention landed exactly the way, the impact was exactly what you wanted it to be. And I said to him, "You need to be careful in a situation like this, because sometimes that level of toxicity
Mm-hmm.
that's involved sometimes with an intentional um, comment that's made, and then you try to cover it up."
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, that's not what I meant."
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him, "Let me take a step back for a second. Let me try to understand this. Maybe it is me, right? So let me think about it for a minute. Did I receive that information because throughout the years, my understanding of the EDD and the PhD, and those kinds of intellectual arguments
Mm-hmm.
have rested in a really negative space inside of me?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "I'm thinking about that, but I think in this case," I was like, "I think in this case, I'm going to go with the impact, that I think that you meant." And he insisted
Ooh.
that it
Mm-hmm.
was not so. So I'm saying this to say it is possible. It
Mm-hmm.
is absolutely possible in this case that his intention, while he thought it, perhaps maybe it was not the way that I received it, right? Perhaps it wasn't. But we live in a world where this happens. This is a case that kind of highlights that I am so adamant about him, that his intention was to have this kind of negative impact, but perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps it really wasn't. Perhaps what resonated with me was
Mm-hmm.
all of those conversations, those intellectual, arguments that have been going on for decades about the PhD and the EDD, that I was overly sensitive about it.
So it sounds like there's two filters going on, but just before we move on, because that is a really important thing,
Mhm.
is a lot of people might not know what EDD stands for,
Yeah,
and that's a doctorate in education. Is that right?
that's right.
And
Right.
then, of course, a PhD is Doctor of Philosophy, which can
Right.
mean like a million things.
Right. Right.
And
Exactly.
so, what I like about the EDD is, and I have the PhD, is that you specifically got your doctorate in the realm of education.
Right.
And my
Right.
doctorate is in rhetoric. And I
Yeah.
just happen to also focus on teaching. But a lot of people with PhDs didn't really learn how to teach,
Yeah.
but there is still seems like there is a hierarchy of some sort. So what I heard in that comment, and I'm not sure who you're talking about, but I probably know the person,
I'm sure you do.
is the thing I heard is it was a little bit of a slam.
Yeah, that's what it did. It felt like a slam, over the years, I've really had to think about it. Was this? I think as communicators, right,
Mm-hmm.
as people who talk to other people, we do have a responsibility too when we receive an idea or
Mm-hmm.
words. So we do have to think more mindfully about, okay, what am I bringing to this? Am I understanding this in this particular way because of? And I know that we talked about sensitivity, but that's
Mm-hmm.
still important, right?
Yeah,
That's sensitive. Acknowledging one's sensitivity helps us, I think, to understand whether that impact is coming from the person who said it or from me.
absolutely. And so it isn't just that I would say ouch
Yeah.
when you might have said something. It's that where is my filter? What is my background? What are my experiences? And have I got some kind of maybe implicit hostility
Yeah.
toward a certain person based on, the identity group that they belong to.
Yeah, very true. Or just in terms of like, especially if you're at work and
Hmm.
you kind of get to know people over time, and so
Hmm.
you hear certain things. I mean, there was someone at work who used to say things like, he I gave I think it was a report about something at the college, and so this person said, "Oh, it's so you speak, the two of you speak so eloquently." Now we're both women, minority women, and both of us were livid. We were livid. And we let him know.
Yeah.
He said, "Well, that wasn't my intention." And we were just like, "Are you sure?"
You speak so eloquently. Oh my gosh.
What I asked him was, and I said, I said, "This is important for me to understand your intention." Okay. I said, "Why didn't you say the same thing to the other speakers who were not people of color?"
Yeah.
And he was silent. And I said, "It hurt."
Yeah.
I said, "It hurts." It's like, you may have thought that was a wonderful thing to say. Maybe, I said, "I don't know what's going on in your mind. I don't. I'm not going to pretend that I do, but you do have to understand that what you said was hurtful." And it took him days, but he did come to my office and he said, "I am so sorry. That wasn't my intention. I am so sorry."
That's definitely worth a lot, even if it took days. At least it
Yeah.
sounds like he had to process it.
Yes.
And maybe he had to speak to other people and get some perspective, because it sounds like, again, when I didn't mean it that way is defensive. It's like
Mhm.
over explaining. I learned about that. I was just actually talking to somebody a couple of days ago. I had talked to the wife. In fact, I'll tell you who this is. And she said, "Yeah, yeah, my husband and I agree this is good, but you should probably talk to him because it's like a game of telephone." And what I said to him may not be exactly what you want to say to him. And it just reminded me of how language and communication are triangulated. There's always an intermediary. And so, what I think I said and what you heard and what was actually said might be three different things.
Right, right. And that goes back to that responsibility. When you're in a
Hmm.
conversation with someone, it is important to know that we both have a responsibility to understand each other. And so it's important, the feedback that you get from someone. For example, I had written that I said something to my daughter yesterday, and she said, "Oh, is that what you think?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, that's how I received it." And I said, "Well, that was
Oh.
not my intention." And then she said, "Well, can you just say that you hear me?"
Hmm.
And I said to her, "I do hear you." And then I said to her, "Is it solely my responsibility, or is it our responsibility to understand each other?" I said, I said, "My intention is never to harm you or to say something to make you feel, in any way that you are less than, or, so I said, she said, "Mom, I already know that, but it doesn't mean that the words you're using doesn't hurt."
Hmm.
And I said, "I hear you. I will do better."
And that is it. I hear you and I see you,
Yes.
because we all want to be seen and heard. We all want to be seen and heard. And you just reminded me of sometimes interactions with my son. He's my biggest teacher. And I
Mhm.
think I make all my biggest screw ups as a mother. And, he will take things I said negatively, and it's always through his filter. It's always
Oh,
through his feeling of, a lack of self worth or a lack of self confidence.
mhm.
And so I might say, "You've missed a comma here," because, mom's the writer. And so he's afraid to show me his writing. And he's like, "See, you just think it's awful." And I say, "No, I don't think it's awful. I think it's awesome." But he hears it that way. So I have to remember that how I speak to him is going to be received in a certain way. And my son is a brown skinned person. And
Mhm.
so he also hears things. In fact, he's been subject to a lot of racism at his school. His school's 78% white.
Okay.
And and he has quote unquote friends that say things like, oh, go mow lawns or go back to the border. And they
Mm.
think it's funny.
Wow.
It is incredibly hurtful. I said to him one day, I said, Hav, why don't you go get a summer job. Maybe you can mow some lawns. And he's like, I will never mow a lawn. And I'm like, why? I would mow a lawn. And then I found out why.
Yeah.
But the other thing I really like about you in particular is you are an excellent communicator, and you are able to say ouch, or you are able to call somebody on their stuff.
Hmm.
Not everyone does.
Hmm.
So what do you
It's
do about
hard.
that?
Well, I don't think it's easy. I don't. I try. Here's what I think about when I'm calling someone out. I think calling someone out to me sounds too um, like I'm trying to harm them. So maybe
Yeah.
not calling someone out when I want to bring attention to something.
Hmm.
So I always think about, well, what kind of relationship do I want to have after this conversation?
Hmm.
Do I want a relationship after this conversation? If I want a relationship, I need to be careful with my words. And so that's so critical. And when I'm teaching, I talk to my students who are having problems at home,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and I'll say to them, well, what kind of relationship do you want to have with your mom?
Mm.
Ask her. I said, you're angry with her. She's angry with you. What kind of relationship do you want? I said, that will dictate how the words you choose to use when you have a conversation with your mom. And I said, if you don't want to have a relationship with someone, then, I guess you go for it. I don't know. I said, even then, you still have to think about, well, what does that say about your own self-worth and integrity?
Yeah.
So it's not just attack someone if you don't want to have a relationship with them, because you don't want someone to change who you are, to change
Right.
into something that you're not,
Hmm.
or for you to call you outside of yourself, which is horrible. It's a horrible, horrible experience
Hmm.
for someone to give someone that kind of power.
Yeah. 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 Um, I think I'm going to go back to the calling out thing. I think
Mhm.
what I should have said is calling in, because
Okay.
calling in means I want to bring you into this conversation with
Yes, I
me.
like
I
that.
don't want to shame you. I'm
Yeah.
not here again to create more friction than maybe already exists, but I would like to say ouch. And that's why the podcast cover has the word ouch. It took me like half a day to design the darn thing because I just had this image in my mind. So there's an arrow with a heart, and there's like one thing with the thought bubble saying something that he or she thinks is innocuous, and the other person is like, ow, that really hurt.
Yeah.
And i think I think ouch is one of those words that, instead of, well, you big jerk, I can't believe you just said that, it's
Mm,
ouch. That
mm,
makes it a little bit easier for maybe somebody to say, oh gosh, I didn't even realize that I said that in that
mhm,
way. And thank
mm.
you for telling me is a better way of handling it, like the guy that apologized to you the other day, the three
Yeah.
days later, whatever. It's better to say, I didn't realize that what I said impacted you that way. And the other thing, which takes a lot of courage and a lot of emotional intelligence and positive intelligence, is to say, how could I have done better? Or how could I have said this another way that wouldn't offend you?
Right. Right. And that's not always, I mean, doing that kind of metacognitive thinking, where you're trying to figure out, or what should I say? How should I
Mm-hmm.
say it? And
Mm-hmm.
and getting that advice from the person you've offended
Mm-hmm.
is sometimes not easy.
No.
Not easy,
Yeah.
because then I think sometimes our egos get in the way, and then we can't really have the kind of um, conversation that we want, the kind of vulnerable conversations that we need to have in order to do better.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we get stuck in a rut, and we continue to make those mistakes because we have excuses for why someone might be impacted a certain
Mm-hmm.
way based on what we've said to them. Oh, they're too sensitive. Oh,
Yeah.
they're too, it's always their fault,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Always right. Always making the other person wrong makes you feel superior and
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Saving face. And I love that you talked about vulnerability,
Mhm.
because it does, you have to basically take off that outer skin and expose your maybe your ignorance about
Mhm.
something,
Mhm.
because it's not in your realm of experience. If
Right.
I make an offhand, I grew up in a household with fairly insensitive parents
Mhm.
who used a lot of racial slurs
Mm.
and used other kinds of negative language toward other groups of people, whether it was people with different abilities or people with different gender identities.
Mhm.
And so I learned those words. And it wasn't until I got older that I learned that's not how you talk about people. That's not how you address people. That's not how you don't pigeonhole people with these stereotypes and that language.
Oh, right. Right. Yeah. It's funny because I had a student many years ago. My brother was visiting from California, so he was in the classroom when this happened. And so one of my students said she wanted to share an experience that she had with another professor, and because she didn't understand why the professor was upset with her.
Mm,
And I said, "Well, what happened?" And she said, "Well, my professor who teaches speech is Asian.
mm-hmm,
And so she asked us to raise our hand if we had any questions. And so I raised my hand and I said to her, where did she learn how to speak English? And the professor said to her, I'm not answering that question. I'm very offended by
mm-hmm,
what you just asked me.
mm-hmm,
And so the student asked her, well, what did I say that was wrong? And she said, you need some time to think about it. I'm
mm-hmm,
not going to answer it. So she asked me, well, what did I do wrong? And, we had a discussion in class about it.
mm-hmm,
And we talked about how she had by asking someone who looks a particular way,
mm-hmm,
making a comment about their ability to speak English, what
mm-hmm.
you have done is it's offensive because of the assumption that comes with it, the racist assumption that comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, can you imagine someone saying that to you? You're a
Mm-hmm.
Black woman, and someone says to you, "Oh, you speak English pretty well." How
Yeah.
would you feel about that?
Mm-hmm.
It assumes that you don't. You come from a group of people who don't speak English, and you try to identify them in a very racist way that's should be offensive to you, but it's offensive to this person who has a different identity. I said, you're trying to re-identify people based on your limited understanding of them.
Ooh, I love that. Re-identify. Oh gosh.
Yeah, and I said to her, I said, that's painful.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very painful. And we gave her uh, other examples of this happening. Just like in New York, you're walking down the street and you see a bunch of people who look a certain way, and you don't
Mm-hmm.
ask them for directions, but you go to this person to ask for directions because you assume that this is the person you should talk to and not these other people. And I said,
Yeah.
it's like we have this, I said, it's this implicit bias that
Yep.
you have. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's really understanding, well, where is that coming from? And she said, I had no idea that I feel terrible. And I said,
Mm.
well, go talk to her.
Yeah.
Let her know that you understand why
Mm-hmm.
she was so upset with you. And I said, she'll appreciate that it bothered you so much that you had a discussion with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that's what we do when we really want to honor other people, when we
Right.
really want to treat other people with dignity. And I said,
Exactly.
so then go and speak to her. And she came back. She's like, oh my God. She was so happy that I
Mm.
had had this conversation and that had bothered me so much. And
Mm-hmm.
I said, don't be afraid to ask, have those conversations. Sometimes you have to, because she was so upset with you, she couldn't speak to you.
Right.
And that's okay. I said, you should be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
But seeking other people out to help you understand. I said, that's the hard work we have to do, is to seek other people out to help us, to give us another perspective.
Right. And we're almost out of time, but one of the things that I heard in there that you didn't say, but is I think that stops people from apologizing or going back and making an amend is shame.
Oh, yeah.
We don't, we all of a sudden, we've directed all of it to us. So it's all about us.
Yeah.
And if we feel ashamed, that makes it less likely that we're going to come forward and say, wow, I really screwed up. Like, this woman could have learned English in California.
Yeah,
You know,
and she
it's like,
did. That's where she's from.
exactly right. So she's from California. Then, and that's like saying, where are you from? And maybe this person is Muslim and, wears a hijab and has a slight accent, but that person was born in Nebraska,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
not everybody is, from somewhere else. And we do make that assumption.
yeah.
But one of the things that I think we all have to work harder for, and this is why emotional intelligence is so important, whether it's in education, the workplace, at church, on
Mhm.
the street,
At
right, is
home.
how can we start to see each other
Yeah.
and practice empathy and
Mhm,
compassion
mhm, mhm.
and try to be a little bit more outer directed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't be afraid to listen to feedback.
Mhm.
Stop being defensive. I think we really have to work on our egos if we want to have
Mhm.
a better relationship with others.
Yeah, right. I heard a great quote. It was somebody quoted Rumi, and it made so much sense. It was actually on my meditation this morning, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have Rumi in front of me. But he said, "How will you ever be a polished gem if you don't have your edges rubbed?"
Mm,
And
mm,
so the idea is, right, that we all have edges. We have growing edges.
yeah,
And if we don't have them rubbed, i.e., make mistakes and have other people say, hey, wait a minute, that hurt or that wasn't nice,
yeah.
then we will never be that polished gem. And I don't think we'll ever be perfectly polished, but at least we won't have as rough of the edges.
Agreed. I
Yeah.
agree with you. Yes.
Yeah. So again, Margaret is the founder and CEO of It's NOLA. They
Mhm.
are awesome. I'm going to include that in the show notes. And I will say that if you want to find out more about how you can be a more emotionally intelligent person and practice positive intelligence, my information is also in the show notes. And this is a good time to say thank you, Margaret Barrow. And I'll see you all at the PQ Gym.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'm always